Utilities want to tap into the savvy residential energy customer. Distributed energy combined with growing and more dynamic power consumption patterns will become a trend of the future. Or will it? How far can the utility and customer relationship evolve? And what does this mean for flexible energy management? Stay tuned as we discuss the evolution of the utility customer and the type of innovative solutions that are making it possible on today's episode of Energy Central's Power Perspectives. Matt, energy management at the residential level is a topic of growing focus in the utility sector. How are you seeing the conversation unfold with the Energy Central community?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, the trends within Energy Central, it definitely reflects what you suggest in that energy management at the residential level is gaining significant traction among utility professionals. And so on our platform at energycentral.com, those discussions today typically center around smart home technologies, energy efficiency programs, and the integration of renewable energy resources as offerings to customers, but also as a part of wider tools and opportunities that utilities are imagining for the future. And that latter part, how utilities can leverage technologies and programs that are installed at the individual level, that's where I think there's particularly enthusiasm and curiosity. So I think it's going to make today's conversation one that will certainly strike a chord for our listeners.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you to Landis+Gyr, our sponsor of today's show. I'm Jason Price, Energy Central podcast host and director with West Monroe, coming to you from New York City. And with me, as always, from Orlando, Florida, is Energy Central producer and community manager Matt Chester. As promised, we have two guests today that you won't want to miss for their leadership and insights into this rapidly changing area of the power sector. First, I'd like to welcome Prasanna Venkatesan, the EVP of Strategy and M&A of Landis+Gyr Americas. Prasanna, welcome to the Energy Central Power Perspectives podcast.
Thank you, Jason and Matt, for having us. Really interested in the discussion going forward today.
And Prasanna has done us the favor of bringing with him one of Landis+Gyr's key partners, Arch Rao, the founder and CEO of SPAN. Welcome as well, Arch.
Thanks, Jason. Nice to be speaking with you and Matt.
All right, before we dive into our collaboration together, I'd like to give our audience a quick background of each of you. So, Prasanna, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about your time at Landis+Gyr and your role in the power sector.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I joined Landis+Gyr roughly about 16, 17 years ago, back in 2006. I ran the technology piece of the business at that time and then started my career as running the business for Landis+Gyr across Americas, which includes North America, Japan, and South America. We had some fun times, introduced some really good technologies into the industry, two-way command and control of networks and devices. We solved some very critical use cases using our software and analytics for enablement of disconnect of devices, which was monumental at that time because it prevented truck rolls. We did measurement and verification of load control devices, which was fundamental to starting the whole, call it DER revolution at that time, and also did some key use cases around outage and engaging the consumer in the industry. We also built the largest IoT network in Japan, about 50 million devices. And then I shifted my role to running mergers and acquisitions for Landis+Gyr in 2021. And my main area of focus every day is look for innovative partnerships and investments. And SPAN was one of them that we completed in 2024 when I met Arch so many years ago.
Fantastic. Thanks, Prasanna. Now, Arch, I want to give you the same opportunity.
Sure. I started my career in energy about 20 years ago, initially as an academic focused on control systems and power conversion. Quickly realized that I wanted to spend the rest of my career focusing on advancing technologies that can abate the impacts of climate change. I joined as the first employee at a company called Joby Energy, developing airborne wind turbines. Then subsequently worked on energy markets, developing trading algorithms for real-time energy pricing. Then I co-founded a company focused on energy efficiency and energy disaggregation called Vertigris in the early part of the last decade. Then soon after that, I was fortunate to join Tesla in the early days of what subsequently became known as Tesla Energy. So I was fortunate to work on product and technology there, helping design and develop products like the Powerwall for the home, as well as large-scale grid-connected batteries. In more of a commercial and operations capacity, I helped acquire and operate parts of the solar business at SolarCity, but also grew our enterprise beyond North America into EMEA and APAC. So for me, a very formative experience, learning not just how to build products and companies, but also how to scale them globally. I started SPAN in 2018 with a core focus on enabling electrification for buildings, starting with the home, which is one of the largest opportunities for us to decarbonize at scale. Our focus has been redesigning or rethinking what the infrastructure in a home needs to look like to rapidly accelerate the adoption of fully electric homes. And that starts with the home electrical panel. The somewhat understated home electrical panel is ubiquitous. There is no home or building in the world that doesn't have this distribution box in your home. That's been an analog device for as long as all of us can remember it. So at SPAN, we set out on a mission to reinvent the panel to be a fully digital power control system to make it cheaper and more accessible for customers to take that first step towards solar, towards batteries, towards electric vehicles, towards heat pumps. And we've been on that successful journey over the last several years. Much of our focus has been coming at it from the point of view of the customer. How do you enable the customer to make that shift seamlessly? And over the last few years, I had the opportunity to meet Prasanna at Landis, where he was looking at the same problem, albeit from the viewpoint of the utility. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more over the course of the podcast. But over the last several years, we've found what we think is a necessary unlock for utilities and customers to unlock decarbonization at scale.
Yes, we will be talking about that. We're here to talk about flexible energy management, a topic that is getting increasingly popular and growing in demand, especially as electrification grows and spreads and utilities are trying to keep up. So most of our listeners will understand those basic principles moving the industry, but maybe you both can paint a picture for us about what you see in the coming years as the real challenges requiring flexible management and the costs of not acting today. Prasanna, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, listen, our industry goes through interesting times. If you look at the last 10 years prior to 2022, load growth was relatively flat. I remember making presentations to my board back in 2018 and 19, talking about the fact that regulatory approvals are hard to come by, mainly because there is no load growth in the industry. If you now look back into 23, 24, we're in very interesting and exciting times, I would say. I think the biggest technological revolution is happening in our industry right now. After being driven by periods of flat growth, if you look at any study, whether it's from McKinsey, whether it's from Frost & Sullivan, everybody sees a doubling of electricity demand over the next 25 years. And we're seeing largely this demand driven by data centers, which everybody now is aware of, especially with the support and growth of artificial intelligence, the onshoring of major manufacturing elements coming back to us, especially chip manufacturing, agriculture and such, coming back into the U.S., cryptocurrency mining being one element. This Arch talked about transportation electrification and building electrification. All of this, and add to this energy efficiency being sought by everyone, has considerably changed the landscape in which loads are doubling. And flashback to 2007 and 8, when we retired coal plants, which is still in progress, almost 100% achieved at this stage. We're largely dependent upon natural gas-fired plants and also renewable energy, which is becoming front and center of every conversation that we have. I think this growth in demand presents huge challenge for our utilities as I talk to them. Many of them see thousands of megawatts in their state being driven, especially by data centers. And I think this is where the challenge comes in. If we continue to do what we have done in the past, which is investing in assets and other devices, which is one way to solve this problem. But I think more and more there are technologies available in the marketplace, such as from Landis and from SPAN and from others, that are interesting non-wires alternatives to what is happening in the industry today. I think if we don't find the right mix of putting standard assets, transformers, all of that stuff, substations, all the stuff that is required, I think it needs to be coupled with all of the innovation that's happening in the industry in the last 10 to 15 years to really drive the balance that is needed with our energy supply to meet this growing demand. I personally think failure to do so, I think, leads to large grid instability issues, power quality issues, reliability issues. I think the industry is faced with this already. And you add to it, weather-related issues as the one with Beryl that's just happening in Texas, really exacerbates the condition in our country right now. However, I see this as a huge opportunity. I really believe with where technology innovation is in our space and what we've been able to accomplish with better smart grid technologies and other non-wires alternatives can actually easily adapt to this distributed energy resources proliferation that is happening in our country today. Failure to do so, I think there's a lot of operational cost to think so and other things that the utilities will have to manage.
Those are great points, Prasanna. And just to underscore something that you said, with AI, and my understanding is that AI uses 10 times more power than a regular chip. So these data centers that are being built for tomorrow are going to be enormous load centers here. So everything you're saying is spot on. Arch, I wonder if you feel the same way. Are you seeing anything differently? And are you as optimistic as Prasanna is?
Well, I think we certainly see the world the same way. And, the unfortunate reality is the utilities have a fairly important but thankless job of delivering electricity very reliably. And echoing what Prasanna just shared, every left to right model suggests that demand's going to double, if not quadruple, in the coming decade through a combination of new applications, right? Be it AI fuel data centers or growth in edge demand from customers wanting to electrify their lifestyles. The question then becomes not, will this growth happen? The question becomes, in either scenario, be it doubling or quadrupling, how do we manage it in a way that doesn't become exorbitant while not sacrificing reliability, right? The incumbent model to meeting load growth, which was often incremental, was let's build more poles and wires, let's build more transformers, let's build generation capacity as needed to meet this demand. But the pace at which we're seeing this load growth happen cannot be met with the incumbent solutions. So utilities like us are looking for smarter solutions at the edge of grid. And that is, but call it by what you will, at the end of the day is the ability to control demand, not just supply, at the sink, like where the load is happening, right? And that requires a natural evolution of solutions that the utility has right now, from the meters that can have visibility into what is consuming power in real time, and solutions like SPAN that can control these devices in a way that doesn't negatively impact customer experience.
Okay, so given the ubiquity of these challenges and the fact that utilities have seen them coming, perhaps we would expect the power sector to be a bit further along in implementing some of these solutions. But Arch, you notice a shortcoming in that solution space, and that's why you're doing what you're doing at SPAN. So talk to us about that gap in the solution space and what you saw as an opportunity.
I think even if you had perfect knowledge of the load growth, it is very difficult to predict where that load growth is going to happen, right? Especially when you think about customer-led adoption of electric vehicles or customer adoption of solar or battery adoption, or now increasing the electric appliance adoption. So what that means is the utility has to solve for load growth as it happens, as opposed to being able to have this perfect view of the world and build out power line capacity and generation capacity and distribution capacity, if you will. And not only is that difficult to do, it's also not the cost-effective thing to do anymore, given that we have solutions like SPAN that can allow customers to adopt these measures without a long wait period or a very expensive cost to upgrade. So to give you a specific anecdotal example, we have customers across the country. Let's just take, for example, a customer here in California. In order to add a 60 amp EV charger to their home, which only has 100 amps of service capacity, they would typically have to contact the utility, wait between 6 and 9 months to get a new power line dropped into their home, and typically have to pay for the power line upgrade. And if it's a below ground copper, pay for a substantial amount of contractor labor to do the necessary electrical work and field work, right? That can be upwards of $20,000 for a single customer. That is not a cost-effective or a scalable solution to the problem. By contrast, now they can put a SPAN panel in that is a UL certified solution that allows them to electrify at their own pace And they're set for the next 20 or 30 years with a solution that costs them only a few thousands of dollars to install. This now benefits the customer, but also interestingly benefits the utility because they can dedicate their resources to other upgrades on the network that's required as opposed to a single power line to a customer, while also getting the benefit of now being able to measure and control more devices in the home through the SPAN panel, if you will, acting as a gateway, so to speak, for the devices in the home that are being connected to it. That, I think, is a great win-win solution for both the customers and the utilities. And that's where we see a tremendous amount of opportunity for us to scale together.
Very interesting. And of course, Landis+Gyr has been watching these same challenges as well. So, Prasanna, I'm curious to hear from your perspective from the conversations you've been having with utilities, and how did that lead you to Arch and the partnership between Landis+Gyr and SPAN?
Yeah, as you know, we have a very deep history of innovation at Landis. We've been around for a long time. The company was formed in Europe some 100 years ago. And our challenge, quite honestly, Jason and Matt, is, you just can't sit still in the world of innovation that is rapidly increasing, especially in Silicon Valley. And we had introduced a lot of new products in the marketplace. Ever since the solid state meter came out, we've been putting more and more value into that sensor, adding grid edge computing. We've done a lot of, we can now completely do load disaggregation within the meter, as previously mentioned, connect, disconnect, outage management. All of these are fine and great for the devices that were in existence about 2 to 3 years ago. As we spoke about, right, incomes, distributed energy resources, EVs, PVs, storage, heat pumps. After introducing our grid edge computing platform in roughly 2019 is when we introduced into the marketplace, was a huge success because now you can collect information in real time and look at the load disaggregation curves, and actually within seconds can identify where that load came from. But we didn't want to stop there, because just looking at loads and the fact that you can recognize them is not enough. We wanted the control piece to this as well. So we went into the marketplace as part of my mergers and acquisitions role, trying to look for a potential company, someone that deeply understands electrification and how we can change the dynamics when it comes to the whole home. Back in 2018-19, I was introduced to Arch through a investment banker, and what we needed was not only load disaggregation at the meter, but also how can we, let's say for 80%, 90% of the whole home, do a full, call it microgrid platform behind the meter. And we really said that would be game-changing if we can just look at sub-metered loads that Landis can see through their meter, and then use the partner's innovative whole home disaggregation methodology to provide demand flexibility to the utility, but also give good consumer engagement to our utility customers. I met Arch back in 2018 in his Silicon Valley office. At that time, he had just introduced what I would say the early stages of his product, and we formed a relationship that evolved over 3 to 4 years. It was a meeting of the minds, I had to say, because partnerships usually don't work. And then we decided about increasing levels of investment, how can we do things together? But I will say this, Jason, what fundamentally got me attracted to SPAN was just the vision that Arch had for the SPAN device, especially innovating a device much like the panel, which has been around for over 50 to 60 years, and making that digital and making that completely available as a whole home DER visibility device, and the fact that we can aggregate all these loads and provide this, and I don't want to steal Arch's thunder here, but provide a very elegant demand response platform for the utility was very compelling. And that's how that led me to Arch, and we struck a partnership in 2024, and here we are.
It's a fascinating journey. All right, so you are now united and kind of from a commercial sense, and I'd love for you to walk through some use cases or use case, if you will. And I'd love to also hear, and this is where it gets really interesting, is basically what does this joint deployment of Landis+Gyr and SPAN look like at the property level in the context of FERC 2222? Prasanna, why don't you start, and Arch certainly follow up?
Yeah, no, great question, Jason. And Probably Arch is chomping at the bits to saying, can you go first? Here's the deep value proposition that we offer, right? So we are the market leader when it comes to smart metering, networks, software solutions to the utilities. SPAN comes from a different point of view. They looked at the home in a completely different context through the panel and developed a solution set that was the industry first when it came to circuit level, billing grade metering, DER visibility, and controls for the whole home, demand flexibility, if you will. So I thought this was a great marriage in the sense that we continue to make our value proposition better, and we actually enhance our value proposition to existing utility infrastructure and, as Arch mentioned, enable utilities to avoid costly time and time-consuming secondary distribution service level upgrades, balancing loads at the premise. All this, and Arch will probably hopefully add to this, without doing any further upgrades to the home. The 60 amp example that he said is very appropriate. For us, the key value proposition is we combine all the best of our metering platform for the entire house. We add to it the very critical loads that Arch is able to see through his sub-metering. And now it becomes a very good disaggregation methodology used by SPAN for us to use to provide not only consumer engagement for the consumers, but it also gives you a classy way of doing distributed energy resource management, be it at the premise level, or if you really think about this, you can use a series of homes and collect it and actually I'll just loosely, dare I say, look at a zip code and pull all these homes that have SPAN plus Landis solution embedded and actually do a complete, not only whole home disaggregation and delivery to the utility, but we can also do it for an entire zip code if you want to. I think that's where the key value proposition is in the context of what you asked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jason, I'm happy to echo what Prasanna is saying and maybe add to it if that's all right.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so I think really the way to think about this is the key buckets of value to a utility and by extension the customer, right? And the three key buckets that the Landis team and the SPAN team have identified and are frankly finding meaningful positive responses from utilities for are advanced metering, demand flexibility, and electrification enablement. On the advanced metering side, just as Prasanna said, the meter has been evolving over the last several years to provide more than just 15-minute whole home data to be able to use edge compute to detect individual circuits, albeit as a derived data set, if you will. Combined, now we're able to provide a lot more granularity and a lot more resolution because we measure every single circuit that flows through our panel. And we can share that data back to the utility through an existing network and software integration layer that they have through the Landis+Gyr software system and network. On demand flexibility, to us, it's not just about being able to enact occasional demand response events, right? That's interesting, but that still requires the utility to be able to understand the load specifically and potentially to be able to send demand response signals to individual loads. We want to be able to meet the utility where they really need for us to, which is at a distribution level. Can we have certainty of a load shape so that we can plan our resources more accordingly and change that ideal load profile based on extraneous events, right? Be it weather conditions like really high temperature events. That's really what we're planning to provide together. So the ability to be able to say, much like Prasanna said, across a zip code or across a node on the network, hold my load profile to this ideal shape. And we're able to orchestrate that across a large fleet of homes that are enabled with SPAN technology. Now, the communication modality there is, again, leveraging what's already the backbone for utilities, i.e. send a signal back to the meter requesting a certain desired set point, and we're orchestrating that across the different loads in the home using the SPAN technology. The third piece is enabling electrification. We talked about the avoided cost for the customer, where they can avoid the cost of an expensive service upgrade to the individual home. They might only have 100 amps of power coming in. But that problem actually, not surprisingly, cascades upwards to the pole transformer, to the street level or community level transformer, or upstream to the substation, if you will. Those are all also capitalized assets that have a desired operating life. If load growth happens sporadically or in a dispersed way that is happening as we see today, the utility has to be reactive as opposed to proactive in terms of how they upgrade these transformers and other capitalized assets. But with technology like SPAN, they can avoid that cost, not just for the end customer, but also can get high utilization rates, or at least defer the cost of upgrades to their own assets. So those are the three buckets, really: advanced metering, demand flexibility, and electrification enablement, all while making sure that the customer is looped in, right? Delivering a very rich customer experience and an interface through our app that engages the customer just as much as they'd like to, while giving them a better electric service.
That's cost avoidance all around, both at the residential level and at the utility level. But let's dig a bit further at the utility side. You know our listeners of Energy Central, our utility, come from the utility space. What is the pitch that you give to utilities? What is the value proposition that you present to them? And how do you think something like this could scale at the utilities, which is what they're all about? Arch, you want to start? And then Prasanna, anything to add?
Sure, happy to. It's those three categories of value proposition that we typically start with. But as you know, while most utilities are similar in how they operate, they each are at different points in time in their own customer load growth story, right? So they might each be solving for different things, and compound that with the fact that you have state regulations around decarbonization and public commissions requiring a certain degree of performance by the utility. The conversations have take their own flavor, if you will. For most utilities that are in the cycle where they're upgrading their existing metering solution to advanced metering solutions, we are able to have a very practical conversation around what the next generation solution needs to look like, or how can we augment the rollout of their next generation smart meter technology with capacity or capabilities that the SPAN panel can provide, or a version of the SPAN panel can provide. And then there are utilities that are really actively trying to address the equitable electrification challenge ahead of them, right? You have some customers purchasing EVs, some customers now funded through programs like the Inflation Reduction Act, adopting electric water heaters or heat pumps, as the case may be. They all consistently face the same problem, which is how do you cost effectively upgrade the network or avoid the upgrade of a network by using non-wires alternatives. So either looking at it left to right or looking at right to left, we often converge on the similar set of capabilities that Landis and SPAN are providing together to utilities, and gives the utility the option to say, do we want to have this be solutions that are owned by the customer and rebated by the utility, or potentially over time, rate-based by the utility and distributed across their entire network of customers, so that every customer can be cost-effectively upgraded to a better network with better electrification capabilities and better visibility.
So Arch and I have been in front of a lot of utility customers and a couple of regulatory discussions as well. I think if you look at our industry, of roughly 3,000 utilities in the US, a good bit of it is cooperatives. So Arch and I have met at least 3 or 4 of them. And I think their need is very different, right? They buy power from a GNT or sometimes in the spot market, and they find this solution set very compelling. They find this piece of technology and software and consumer engagement that comes with the whole idea of probably avoiding a costly buy in the spot market, mainly because they can aggregate all these loads and take it to their DERMS platform. Whereas the IOUs, as Arch mentioned, driven by regulatory mandates and such, are having a different conversation on, hey, Prasanna and Arch, how do we rate base this asset? How do we put this as part of our, perhaps an energy efficiency plan that fits with it? Or lately, we've been getting a couple tractions on the grid modernization plan, the GRIP funding that's available for technology companies like us. So I think we're really getting a lot of traction around the discussion on what this technology can enable.
Prasanna, you did mention you also pitched this to commissioners. What's the feedback been with them?
I think from a technology perspective, they really understand the value of what it can do, especially with the current state of affairs in terms of load growth and where we are and looking at the next 10 to 25 years. Everybody sees a dramatic increase in load. And I think they too struggle with, do we have enough supply to meet it? And therefore, they feel that the combined technologies of both companies is a very good attraction. The only thing that we have to do a lot of heavy lift around is to go around, our country is determined by, call it 50 states having a different view of how the investment should go. But I believe between a combination of what we're hearing from the Grid Innovation Resilience Program, the GRIP funding, as well as the traditional energy efficiency piece of what utility has access to, is an avenue of discussion and education for us to do over the next few months.
Fantastic. This has been an eye-opening conversation, no doubt, and I'm sure our audience will feel the same. Before we let you go, we do have something called the lightning round, which gives us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about you, the person, rather than you, the professional. So we have a series of questions we're going to throw at you, and we ask you to keep your response to one word or phrase. I think what we'll do is we'll tee off with Arch, followed by Prasanna. Are you both ready?
Sure.
Yes. Lightning round with Jason.
All right, here we go. Favorite analog device?
Oh, it's a good question. Probably a good self-winding watch.
Interesting. Cassette tape player, bring it back.
Favorite quote you'd like to drop with the intent to impress people? Arch.
There's an interesting quote around types of fun, type 1 fun versus type 2 fun that I like to draw on, like type 1 fun being it's fun when you do it, type 2 fun being it's really hard when you're doing it, but it's really enjoyable after. I think building a company and especially executing at the pace we are is a lot about type 2 fun.
Prasanna.
Yeah, since I'm in strategy, I have to go with Peter Drucker. Culture eats strategy for lunch.
A local favorite from your hometown that a visitor must experience?
This is going to be funny because Prasanna and I found out over the years that we actually come from the same hometown back in India, which is a city called Chennai. Must experience, there is a drive-through South Indian restaurant serves some of the best food. I would say, please go experience that.
Prasanna?
Yeah. We're literally kilometers away from our hometown. It's a dish called masala dosa. Highly recommended. Got to go eat it.
I'm writing that down. All right. Any clever ways to motivate children to be energy conscious? Arch.
Yeah. You show them that their iPad doesn't last very long if they keep playing games on it.
I like that. Prasanna.
Yeah.
Or that they have to ride a bike in order to use their iPad. There you go.
So we have this thing called Bring Your Children to Work Day. One of the things that we do very well with the kids that come in is kind of give them a good feel of what it takes, as Arch pointed out, whether it's an iPad or anything else. What does electricity actually mean to us in our day-to-day lives? Because other than this conversation and our listeners, very few people understand the value of electricity, if you will. So it's a pretty good exercise with kids.
Interesting. We're collecting lightning round questions from past podcast guests to ask future guests. And so this one comes from our past guest, Eric Kraus, Director of Customer Experience Delivery for SMUD. He challenges future guests with the following. What are you all doing to create a positive impact in the community for those who may not otherwise be able to participate? Arch.
I'll try to keep this brief, but a personal motivation for me is having grown up in a country like India, where you really see the dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots. And one of the things that I've long believed to be true is that access to energy, access to clean, inexpensive energy is the material unlock to accessing economic growth and education and healthcare and so on. So this is something that's actually personally important to me. So at SPAN, as a matter of fact, we spend a lot of time working with affected communities. And in fact, we did a project in New Orleans, for example, after a hurricane hit them, to bring them our technology at cost, or where we can contribute without margin technology, along with batteries, to give them resiliency. And that's our small way of giving back. And we do this as a team here as well, where we work with local agencies to install solar systems in homes that otherwise could not afford to put it on themselves, right? Where our employees volunteer their time to do it. I think it's an important way to give back to community, and one that hopefully will have meaningful impact on lives.
Interesting. Prasanna?
Yeah. Similar to what Art said, for me, kids are so important in our society today. One of the things that Landis does exceptionally well, since we've been around for such a long time, is the whole concept of mentoring and going and spending quality volunteer hours in schools, providing internships, all the other things that are valuable to establishing and growing one's mind. And this is something not only near and dear to the Landis+Gyr executive team, but also near and dear to our employees. It's been around for a long time, and that is something that we consistently try to do better every year.
That's great. All right, so gentlemen, now's the opportunity for you to ask a future guest. So what would be a challenge for a future guest to answer? Arch, go ahead, and then Prasanna follow up.
Here's a question for you, which I think I try to answer when I can. What is the most impactful thing you did this year to positively impact climate change?
Okay, Prasanna?
Yeah, we talked about energy. I'll sort of stick with the same theme, Jason. The next biggest challenge, if you want to put electricity as one of the challenges or one of the top 5 challenges that the world is facing, I think water is one of the biggest challenges facing our nation and the globe, I would argue. So your next guest should probably be asked the question of what is it specifically that they're doing in the areas of water conservation, clean water, and the likes, because much like our distribution network, the average age of a water pipe below us, I think, is around 70 to 80 years. So I think that would be a good question, good theme for us to pull on the next time.
I feel like both of you have taken the show to a new level. This will be hard to follow. So I want to thank you both for this, intense and really thought-provoking conversation today. I want to give you a final word to both of you, the final question. So if our listeners take one item away from today's conversation, an action item or a new way of thinking, or just a piece of advice, what do you want that to be? Arch, let's start with you.
I think the one thing to take away is, for me, at least the most important takeaway would be all of us can have a positive impact in decarbonization by taking simple steps to electrify our own lives. And those can be done cost effectively today without having to sacrifice anything functionally or from a comfort standpoint. So, go on the internet, pick up that phone, go buy that heat pump you've been wanting to buy, and of course, buy a span panel with it.
Prasanna?
Yeah, my thing is the concept of flexibility management, if you kind of pick on that a bit. These are very long threaded conversations to have, because our system of governance is one of regulation and convincing stakeholders. Some of the questions you asked, Jason, are just so spot on. What does it take for decision makers or regulators or commissioners to act upon the precipice of where we are in terms of energy transformation? So I think it's imperative that to the listeners and people especially in the energy utility side of the business, is to keep the conversations open between us and just call it the public officials, because a lot of this is explaining the intent of what new technology can do to some very traditionally solved problems from many years ago. And these require investments. I would dare say it also requires intestinal fortitude to move things forward. But the solutions are there. It just requires us to keep talking about change, talking about the willingness to change. And for that, Jason and Matt, and Energy Central, thank you guys. I mean, this is what needs to happen on a regular cycle to keep this conversation going.
Excellent. Thanks so much for today's conversation to each of you. And I'm sure our listeners will have some comments, questions, and follow-ups. And we invite them to leave those in the comments section of the Energy Central post for this episode. And when they do, we'll invite you both to hop in and keep the conversation going. Until then, though, we just want to thank you for sharing your insight with us in today's episode of the podcast.
Thanks, Jason and Matt, for having me. This is Arch and Span. It was great to chat with you guys about the future of energy.
Yeah, thanks, Jason and Matt. This is Prasanna. Really appreciate the time. Very useful conversation. Let's keep this going.
You can always reach Prasanna and Arch through the Energy Central platform, where they welcome your questions and comments. We also want to give a shout out of thanks to the podcast sponsors that made today's episode possible. Thanks to Landis+Gyr, a global provider of integrated energy management solutions. Landis+Gyr engineers and delivers cutting-edge technology to measure, manage, and control energy in real time at the grid edge. The company's innovative and proven portfolio of software, services, and intelligent sensor technology is a key driver to decarbonize the grid. Working with an array of proven partners, Landis+Gyr is leading some of the largest smart grid projects in the world, while building the foundation for clean energy resource integration. To learn more, visit landisandgear.com. Once again, I'm your host, Jason Price. Plug in and stay fully charged in the discussion by hopping into the community at energycentral.com, and we'll see you next time at the Energy Central Power Perspectives Podcast.